All right, Bijan, the 2025 NBA draft is in the books, and now that we've caught up on some much needed sleep, I have to say for myself, it's time to break down what the Wizards accomplished. And they made three picks and two trades across two nights, which means they were technically on the clock five different times. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe ESPN went to commercial every single time they were on the clock, which was hilarious as it continued. But also, I feel like it's worth noting literally the best pick in NBA history, Nikola Jokic in 2014. He was drafted during a Quesarito commercial by Taco Bell. 41st overall, went on to win three MVPs, of course, a championship. So I'm going to go ahead and say it was a good sign.
Dude, I live on U Street and there's a Taco Bell cantina like 50 paces that way, and you're putting me in the mood for Taco Bell right now. I think the NBA and ESPN want the Wizards to draft the next Nikola Jokic, so maybe that happened last night or the night before. I think it's good news.
Or maybe they found some inefficiency with the draft, and that's why they made those trades. They were like, "Hey, man, we got a commercial break coming up a few picks later. Let's go from 18 to 21 and make sure we hit the sweet spot." All right, quick rundown of their picks. Sixth overall, Tre Johnson, a guard from Texas. 21st overall, Will Riley, a wing from Illinois. 43rd in the second round, Jamir Watkins, a wing from Florida State. So with their picks, the Wizards got one of the best shooters in the draft, a big wing with a great motor, long-term upside play, I believe. And then after taking two one and dones, they go for a guy who went to school for 5 years. He's 23 going on 24, is a physical defender with a plus wingspan. So what were your thoughts on their overall direction in the draft?
So the fact of the matter, Chase, is that the Wizards finished dead last in the NBA in offensive rating last year, which I think explains both of their first round picks, Tre Johnson and Will Riley. Tre Johnson is a bucket, scored 40% of his threes this past year, three-level scorer, led the SEC in scoring as an 18-year-old freshman. That is insane. I've always had him as number three on my big board, and he is a scorer. So that not remedies that situation in scoring, but it definitely gives them an upper hand going into next year. Also with Will Riley, he does everything on offense at least somewhat well. He can pass, he can dribble, he can shoot. He's really good at attacking. He's got a relentless motor. His finishing is also pretty decent. I would like to see a little bit more defense from him, but Will Dawkins did tell us 2 nights ago that he thinks that Will Riley is an underrated defender. So we'll see where that goes. And then with Jamir Watkins in the second round, that's a guy who they can sort of take a flyer on, right? He showed a lot of defensive upside at Florida State this past year. You mentioned he's been at school for 5 years. He also went to VCU. So he is an older guy. He's older than Bub Carrington, Keyshawn George, all those guys. But he has that defensive upside. He can get his hands in passing lanes. He also scored over 18 points a game in just 30 minutes a game this past year, which is really good offensive production. So I think they kind of hit a bunch of different things with what they did with their three picks this year. What do you think?
Yeah, offense was really important. I think that's an important point because the first 2 years, Bilal Coulibaly, Alex Sarr, those guys were defensive picks, and Will Dawkins has said that on the record, right? So they added more offense. And the more I think about it, now that the dust has settled, I think Tre Johnson might be the best offensive prospect they've drafted in quite some time, maybe since Bradley Beal. Like, they've drafted some talented offensive players like Denny Avdia, Rui Hachimura, Bub Carrington. Alex Sarr, Bilal Coulibaly, those guys might prove to be really talented offensive players long term. But in terms of a prospect, he checks off so many boxes, especially as a shooter. And then I find it really interesting that they spent one of their picks on a non-one and done. It was a second round pick, so expectations need to be commensurate for that. But just to put it into perspective, Jamir Watkins is about 5 years older than both Bilal Coulibaly and Bub Carrington were on draft night. And if they do hit on it, it could be interesting for the timeline because 2 seasons from now, if you're trying to compete for the play-in tournament or the postseason, maybe you're ready to go on a deep playoff run. He might be up to speed by then because he's a more experienced player. So let's go one by one through the picks. Tre Johnson, he's about 6'5" without shoes, so about 6'6" on the court, 6'10" wingspan, so he's got the length, 37.5-inch vertical leap. He averaged 19.9 points and zero hobbies last year at Texas. I don't know if you've seen the video that has since gone viral, but right after they
Your
drafted
video.
him, it was my video, it was my interview I had with him at the Combine. So if you haven't seen it yet, it's gone essentially platinum on social media right now. So here it is. Here's what he said. I saw an interview where you said you kind of don't have many off-court hobbies. You're just like all hoop.
Yeah, I
Is
put
is that
everything
legit?
around
Can you kind of
basketball.
expand on that?
No, it's really what it is though. It's not much to explain. It's everything I'm doing is basketball related unless I'm I just got a book, so I'm trying to expand a little bit into reading, but everything is basketball related unless I'm either listening to music, on the phone with friends, sleep, and that's probably about it.
What do you listen?
All right, Bijan, before we talk about Tre Johnson, the player, just what are your thoughts on that? This is a pretty serious hooper, isn't he?
I love Tre Johnson. You know that he's my guy. He's been my guy since like November. And when we talked to him, or when you talked to him, I should say, at the Combine, I unfortunately didn't get a chance to talk to him. It kind of just solidified all of my thoughts about him. Like, this guy lives in the gym. He literally doesn't do anything else other than think, breathe, eat, sleep, basketball, which I love. And it translates to the court, right? He is insanely good on offense. I love Tre Johnson, and the fact that he doesn't have any hobbies, I think, is good, because I think it'll lend itself to more competitiveness in the Wizards locker room, and that's something that Will Dawkins talked about this week as well. Same thing with Will Riley. Really competitive guy. He's going to get into the locker room and force the guys to compete a little bit harder. But when you talked to him, Chase, at the Combine, when he was saying this stuff about not having any hobbies, did it kind of like set off a neon light in your head, like, this guy would be great to have in a locker room?
Yeah, I mean, they want guys who love basketball, right? And I think at this point, there's no question that that's an accurate description of Tre Johnson. Hopefully he can find a little work-life balance. I think that's always good for everybody. But, the numbers bear it out. This guy's obviously very serious about his craft. He is about as complete a shooter as you can find in the draft. So he shot 39.5% from NBA three-point range, right? He was at 39.7% overall. About 40% from NBA three-point range. That's an adjustment for a lot of young players, but he already can knock down shots from that deep. And, I think that's a great sign for how his shooting could translate to the next level early on. And that was on 200 attempts, so it was not a small sample size. He shot about 55% on corner threes, about 39% on threes in half-court sets, and about 44% on threes in transition. So he's elite across the board. I think the half-court numbers are important, but this is a team that likes to play fast, right?
Yeah.
And if he is really good at, running on the move, getting a jump stop, knocking down a three, that's going to bode really well, because that's the way the Wizards want to play. And as we saw with the Thunder and the Pacers in the finals, that's a very effective way to play, especially if you're a young team. He's also great at moving off the ball. I think that jumps out when you watch his film. I've compared him to Devin Booker. That's a guy who he has really modeled his game after, admittedly. But Richard Hamilton might be another comp. Going back a little bit further, a guy who was actually drafted by the Wizards, has a similar frame, really good shooter, won a championship with the Pistons. Unfortunately, it didn't happen here. They traded him too early. Maybe I'll have to see Tre Johnson wear a mask to really prove if it's a great comparison.
He's got to have some aura, right? Because you have jersey biting Kobe, you got mask LeBron, mask Hamilton. He's got to have one of those things.
So let's talk about Will Riley. He's about 6'8.5". Without shoes, 6'9" wingspan, 32-inch vertical leap at the Combine. He averaged 12.6 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists last year, shot 43% from the field and about 33% from three. What do you think about Will Riley?
So Will Riley's interesting because he did most of his production for Illinois this year off the bench, which I think is very important when you think about his numbers and what he brings to a team. And one thing that was interesting, I believe our own Chris Miller tweeted this. He was talking to someone who works at the University of Illinois, either an assistant coach or a trainer.
No, he was talking to Brad Underwood. I ended up writing the story. Chris sent me the audio. So Brad Underwood is the head coach of the University of Illinois.
Yeah, so everybody go read Chase's story. Shameless plug by you, I have to say, but no, that's a good point.
There are more on the way. Just wait.
Well, yeah, all right, so everybody go to monumentalsportsnetwork.com. But Chris Miller said that Brad Underwood told him that the Wizards had more people tapped in for longer to Illinois in terms of a scouting perspective than any other team he had ever seen. So the Wizards really, really, really were tapped into Illinois, and they really wanted to see not only Will Riley, but Kasparas Yakuchonis, who's ended up going to the Miami Heat. If you have a player who can do a little bit of everything on offense, you'll be fine. And if he can have that production coming off the bench, which will be his role in the NBA, I think it's a good omen for any team. He's a good finisher. And again, I mentioned his motor. He's an attacker. He can get downhill. He can get to his spots. He can get past his first man. The only problem is I want to see him finishing consistently. His finishing package is good. It's just a little bit up and down. I want to see him have a little bit more vertical athleticism and finish tougher at the rim. But overall, I thought the pick made sense for the Wizards. And it's okay to draft a guy who's going to come off the bench at 21 overall. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think he's a classic project who could prove to be a diamond in the rough. This was a big-time recruit coming out of high school. And if he went back to school for his sophomore year, he might be a top 10 pick a year from now, right? So the Wizards are taking a long view with this. High motor, as you mentioned, sixth man of the year in the Big Ten. And Brad Underwood, that's not all that he said. He also told Chris Miller that he is the second most talented offensive player he's ever coached, okay? And that's only to Michael Beasley. And Brad Underwood was an assistant coach at Kansas State when Michael Beasley played there. Didn't work out in the NBA, but was a tremendous college player. And you mentioned Kasparas Yakichonis is on the same team and was considered one of the best playmakers in this draft. So I think it's really high praise when you consider that contrast. So Jamir Watkins, 6'5" without shoes, 6'11" wingspan. That's a plus 6-inch wingspan. That's unusual. Averaged 18.4 points, 5.7 rebounds, about a steal a game last year. He's going to need to improve his shooting, about 43% from the field, 32% from three. Started his college career at VCU before transferring to Florida State. And if you know college basketball, you know that means he plays physical defense because you can't play at those schools unless you do that. What are your thoughts on Jamir Watkins?
A defensive guy, and I think they went with defense in the second round because they needed offense in the first round. I thought the pick made sense here as well. I mean, number 43 was almost exactly the pick that they had before. They had 40, and now they had 43, so they went ahead and took Jamir Watkins. One thing that stood out to me when talking to Will Dawkins last night about Watkins was he said Jamir Watkins was in the 99th percentile in getting to the free throw line. And I said that, and I was like, he said that, and I was like, I wonder what that's all about. Go to see Jamir Watkins' stats. He went to the free throw line almost 8 times a game for Florida State this past year, which is kind of insane considering he only played 30 minutes, and he wasn't a ball-dominant guard. He was a forward. He did handle the ball a lot, but getting to the line 8 times a game is pretty insane, and that speaks to his physicality and his aggressiveness on offense. His production, again, is good. 30 minutes a game, over 18 points a game, good rebounder. He can get his hands in passing lanes. He's a tough physical defender. His offense is better than people think. I mean, I know his three-point shooting percentage has kind of hovered around the low to mid-30s his entire career, but that's okay. Again, he's going to be coming off the bench for the Wizards anyway. I'm looking forward to seeing him in Summer League, actually, because, Chase, when you and I were at the Combine, we were watching these scrimmages on the last day, and I'll be honest, I was not paying attention to Jamir Watkins as much as I was paying attention to a lot of other guys on the floor. But Jamir Watkins made a lot of really good plays in that scrimmage. I remember he had a steal and a buzzer-beating like 35-foot three at the end of the second quarter or something. And he was physical, and he was like dogging guys at half court on defense. So I think the pick made sense. But what did you think?
Yeah, so first of all, when we were at the Combine, remember I said pay attention to these scrimmages because you never know. It was a couple years ago that Tristan Vucevic actually stood out in those scrimmages. The Wizards ended up taking him in the second round. So that's 2 out of 3 years they've taken a standout from those scrimmages. He's going to need to improve his shooting, and I think what will be interesting is that he is a little bit older, so the trajectory might be a little different, banking on a guy who's 23 going on 24 to improve his outside shot as opposed to an 18-year-old. However, Will Dawkins did mention that he was 36% on catch and shoot threes over the past 2 seasons. That's pretty good. Like if you can get that number up a little bit, or even if that number just translates to the next level, he can be pretty effective. You mentioned the free throw rate. That is a big deal. It's not only his physical play, it's his ability to get to the basket and to put himself in situations to draw free throws. Obviously, there's been a big conversation about free throw merchants. Well, there is a skill to drawing free throws and generating free throws.
Ethically, if you can do it ethically.
Yeah, if you can do it ethically, and it's better when it's your team doing it and not another team, right? So we'll see what kind of tricks of the trade he has in that regard. And as you mentioned, it'll start in Summer League, which we're going to talk about in a second here. But first of all, Tre Johnson, second in betting odds to win Rookie of the Year behind only Cooper Flagg.
I get it.
What is his path to Rookie of the Year?
I understand the odds. I understand why he's second favorite. Because in terms of situation, in my mind, Tre Johnson got drafted to the best situation possible because he's going to have runway, right? The Wizards are already making moves to sort of shake up their backcourt and give younger guys more of an opportunity to handle the ball. Cooper Flagg makes sense to be the betting favorite, right? He was like this generational prospect. He's going to Dallas. He's going to have the ball in his hands. I get it.
He's dominated every level, so like until that stops.
Absolutely. That makes sense. But then you got guys like Dylan Harper who's going to a San Antonio team that has already have, Chris Paul, De'Aaron Fox, Stephon Castle. Like him having the ball in his hands is going to be harder to come by than with Tre Johnson. So if you get a guy who already showed that he can put the ball in the hoop easily in a conference as tough as the SEC, going to a team in the NBA where the coaching staff and the general management will say, give this guy the ball, Trey, go take the ball, go score 3 levels, go shoot 40% from 3 like you already did. It doesn't shock me. And honestly, Chase, I've said this for a long time, but Tre Johnson's ability to score is why he should have been the 3rd overall pick in this draft for a very long time.
Yeah, it's not surprising at all because of the situation, as you mentioned. And this is an offensive award. 20 of the last 22 rookies of the year in the NBA have averaged at least 15 points per game. And one of those exceptions was Stephon Castle last year, who averaged 14.7 points per game. So it usually goes to the guy who scores the best. And Tre Johnson, we know he's a great shooter. We know he's a great scorer. And he's going to a team that's probably going to give him a lot of minutes and a lot of shots. So I think his MO is probably going to fit right in with his role. And the door is going to be open, I think, not only for him, but honestly, a lot of young players to take a step forward and really take it when it comes to becoming one of the primary scoring options on this team. I'm guessing Bub Carrington's scoring average is going to go up. I'm guessing that could happen for Bilal Coulibaly, Alex Sarr, maybe Keyshawn George, and Tre Johnson is included in that mix. Let's do a quick look ahead to Summer League, which I'm always excited about. But I'm particularly excited about it this year because I think we're going to see some of, if not all, of the rookies last year play in Vegas. It might not be for too many games, but this is something that the franchise has not done in the past. Corey Kispert did not come back for Summer League a second year after his rookie season when he could have, right? The front office chose not to send him out there. And it takes me back to Will Dawkins' introductory press conference because it was right around Summer League. And I asked him after the press conference, I was like, are you going to carry over Oklahoma City's philosophy on the Summer League? And he said, yes, they are. And basically what the Thunder do is no matter how good you are, you got to go out for a second Summer League. And they've done that for a long time. And the reason why they do it is because like Kevin Durant, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, those guys played multiple years in the Summer League. And so they always had that in their back pocket. They could say to a young player, well, like, they did it. Why can't you? You know, what's your excuse? And when it comes to the Thunder doing it, I'm sort of a Summer League junkie, and I've watched it for many years. I've gone to it for like 5 straight years. Some of the most talented Summer League teams I've ever seen were the Oklahoma City Thunder 2 or 3 years ago. You know, they had Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren and Josh Giddey at the time. And I think it was a pretty decent precursor of what was to come. They just won a championship with 2 of those 3 guys. And sometimes we make too much of Summer League, right? But I think when a team looks good and they've got a lot of young players performing well, it's a good indication of future success because it's a good read on how much young talent a team has, both in terms of quantity and quality. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And by the way, he said Bub Carrington looks great behind closed doors. The Wizards had their young players return to the facility on May 6th. So they've been in there for a while. So I think this is sort of a midway point of the offseason. Maybe they only play one game, guys like Alex Sarr and Bub Carrington. But it's going to be a valuable glimpse at, I think, what to expect from them next season, honestly.
I think the Wizards are going to put out a Summer League team that is as similar to their regular season roster and the regular season depth chart as any team in the NBA. Because they're already the youngest team in the league, right? And you have all these rookies, all these guys going into their second year, third year, who need development because they're going to be having the ball in their hands a lot more. Like the amount of playing time this year that Bub Carrington is going to have the ball in his hands and lead the offense is probably going to be double, triple what it was last year, right? So if you have that dynamic in play, you're going to need to have these guys out there. Now, Bub Carrington, Alex Sarr, they might not play every Summer League game, but they'll play 2. They'll play 2.5 Summer League games, right? And so if that happens, I think the Wizards are going to have a really good chance of actually going far in the Summer League, and it's good for the younger, not the younger guys because they're all young. They're all younger than us by a lot, but the guys who just got to the team, Jamir, Watkins, Tre Johnson, Will Riley. It's going to be good for them to be playing alongside guys who are young just like them, stepping into a new role just like they are, and still needing to develop. And I think it'll be good. It'll lend itself to a lot more production on the floor, and it can also lend itself to more chemistry because how often in the NBA do you have players who play in the Summer League and then play with a completely different roster once they actually get to the regular season? That happens the vast majority of the time. And so for this Summer League team, if you have players playing with each other in Vegas who are going to play with the exact same lineup in November in Dallas, that's a really good dynamic.
Well, it's not just November and this season. You know, who knows what the Wizards are going to be competing for 2-3 years from now, but the core of that team might be on display in Las Vegas, maybe just for one game again, but like the backcourt of Bub Carrington and Tre Johnson, like them developing chemistry on the court in actual games is going to start in Las Vegas. And all of those games, by the way, are going to be on Monumental Sports Network and the Monumental Plus app. So make sure you download that. Make sure you subscribe to our Monumental Sports Network YouTube page. You're not going to want to miss the Summer League this year. Again, I'm a summer league sicko. I'm a summer league junkie, but like this year is going to be extra special. I guarantee it. So you and I are expecting to both be in Las Vegas. There should be a rookie camp before that. Plenty of coverage this offseason heading your way, Wizards fans. So again, make sure you subscribe to our Monumental Plus app, subscribe to our YouTube page, and we'll see what's in store with this young Wizards team.